So we're going to shift gears a little bit to sort of a proactive stance. What do you do when your school has a threat or an initiative that you want to move forward? So you've built your healthy culture, you've gone through polarity training, you've got all the non-sexy, great structural stuff, everybody's in alignment, and now there are things on the horizon. How do you know a trend is an issue for your school? Anyone?
When you start to lose students, families.
Yeah, there's usually pain involved, right? Do you have to be feeling the pain? No, it's really enough for the dude down the street to be feeling the pain. You're like, okay, that's happening to him. You know, if you see general softening in the market, do you need to see softening in your numbers to know that they're softening in the market and to start identifying it as a threat? And I do think that that pain piece is the threat risk versus general trend. And it's really actually, there's a lot of reasons why I love having Amada here. But one of them is because she can bring us regional data, which we're going to talk a bit about. Because national data is great because it gives you general trends. It's the regional data that really helps dig into, all right, what's really happening here. Anybody know who that is? Yeah. So when you're getting a board to do strategic action, what does a strategic agenda look like? I was a litigator. I can stand here all day long.
More than 50% is generative.
More than 50% is generative. So what does it look like in an agenda?
Short.
The agenda's short. What's it got on it? Questions. What kind of questions? Yeah, big questions. How many reports have you got on there? Is it 0? Jack said they're not important. So you got a consent agenda. How many of you use consent agendas? How many still have people who, like, you know, they put forward the consent agenda and they say, is there any discussion? Okay, so consent agenda, and then you got a strategic question. What kind of report do you have?
Yeah, you might tee up some data to help inform the conversation.
Yep. Where might that data come from?
The committee that would handle the execution of that item.
Yeah, if you're truly a strategic board, how are your committees doing? They're actually working, right? Committees actually meet, they work, they do stuff, and they might bring work forward. It can also come from staff. It's really important to move your agendas in this direction. These conversations tend to keep board members a little bit more engaged than let's go through 5 rounds of reports. So I've been a board chair, I've chaired a governance committee, I've chaired a search committee, and I've chaired an advancement committee. And I actually used to start every board meeting and I'd say, okay, let's do the numbers. You know, and I'd hit my treasurer and he'd hit a couple of high numbers, hit the admissions person. Like, you know, we had maybe 6 key data points that we would hit. That was our dashboard. And I was like, okay, that's it. We're done. Any other reports we can actually do? You can do a written report. I've seen heads go into video reports. So they do these little 5-minute like video clip updates that people can listen to. It's like flipping your board meeting. But you're actually not burying the strategic question to the last 17 minutes of the board meeting when half of the board has already left. Don't do that. So really think about this as you move forward. When you're looking at strategic action, particularly when we get into these trends, and you'll see some handouts here. Looking at time, I'm not sure how well this is going to work out, but we're going to give it a shot. But really identifying and giving language to what is the issue. You know, so if it's enrollment, if it's value proposition, what is that? How could it impact our school? what else do we need to know and where are we going to get that information? Because the data is really important. And some of the data we talk about today won't be enough to inform your actions of your school because you're going to want more localized data, you're going to want more parent data, you're going to want more things to think about. Identifying those polarities and tensions and potential obstacles is really big. So everybody laughed when I said, tradition is peer pressure from dead people. How many of you, tradition can be one of the biggest obstacles that you're going to hit before you make any change in your school? Yeah, it's huge. And then really look at your process, because not everything that comes to the board is going to be on that board agenda. They don't own the whole thing, whatever it is. But a lot of times you're going to have, so what staff needs to be involved from the get-go? Which board members? Is it a board committee? Is it a potential task force that you need the board to put up? And then what's the strategic ask of the board? This last one I've gotten very hot on in the last couple of years. I've got a friend of mine who's taken a couple of companies public. He served on nonprofit boards, for-profit boards. And he said, this is the most important thing. Too many nonprofits go into a strategic agenda, a strategic question. They don't tell the board exactly what it is that they need. Do you need the board to vote on something in particular? If it's coming out of committee, it's nice when the committee says, we've done our research, here it is. Here are the 3 choices that we've come to. We must make a choice. Or do you need the board specifically to do something? If it's a fundraising thing, what can we commit to? But be pretty specific here in your ask, because how many of you have had the same conversation, 10, 15 times, and then half of your board rolls off and you got a whole bunch of new people and you got to catch them back up and then you have the same conversation for the next 5 years? Really be pretty specific with that ask. So if you look at the little handouts you've got in front of you, we actually lay this out. And then it says, what would your agenda look like? Like, how would you lay this out in front of your board? At NEIS, we did something, we kind of got in this pattern after a while, and I always thought it was a pretty smart thing. We would actually lay a lot of groundwork at one meeting, and when the board wouldn't vote until the next one, or maybe 2 meetings afterwards, because it's just sort of giving them time to get acclimated to the data and what is the decision, and to address some of those polarities through conversations. It's hard to get people to just jump to a specific action, particularly if it's a big one and can change fundamentally your institution. Any questions on any of that? Jack and Amada, anything to throw in on that one? Okay, so we structured this section a little differently because I love a good case study. So they all start from a place of dysfunction, just for a little general conversation. And then we'll talk about some trends. The vice chair of your board is the major donor at your school. His family has provided support for the school since its founding, but he is a new generation of philanthropist. He has been very involved in building decisions on the new upper school building, for which he was the main donor, and now would like to be more involved in the prioritization of financial aid packages, something which his family is thinking about endowing. The head of school and financial aid director have been saying this is inappropriate. The donor has been telling a few board and other community members that this pushback is outrageous, and things will be different when he becomes board chair next year. Okay, so if he's the vice chair, he's probably chair of the what? Governance committee. I love it. And it will be different next year. What happens?
Debra, I have a question.
Yes, Autumn.
When you said, like, from whose vantage point? The board chair's vantage point or the head of school's vantage point? Like, who is?
Pick a side, baby.
Okay. Vice chair's vantage point over here. Okay.
So a healthy process, let's just say.
Healthy process.
So
Dare to dream.
You put a container around it, so just telling a few other community members and stuff, you try to stop that and put walls around it. Then you bring it inside those walls and you speak plainly about intent, decision rights, and all this stuff, including board succession.
And who are you talking to?
You're talking to the entire board at this point, ideally. Just talking about succession is something that can be discussed openly in the board vault. And the link between giving and control has to be broken.
process, independently of how it would be financed, to get a consensus on what the process would be, like they can just decide either to be part of that or not.
Right.
Anyway, that's my question.
Right. What does prioritization of financial aid packages mean?
That means who's getting money.
Right, I mean, it could go a lot of different ways.
Right. Right. And should board members, okay, collectively, should board members ever be involved in this process?
No.
See, I mean, I'm giving you like low-hanging fruit to begin with.
I mean, I think we can tell them also, like, this is best practice, and this is why. This is why. I mean, think about if you were on the other side of that. Would you like your board chair knowing everybody's, I mean, and talking about how confidential financial aid is and how seriously it's guarded from every other part of the school?
Who's having that conversation?
I would feel like as a head of school, I would have something to do with that conversation because it's such a sensitive issue.
How many of you heads of school would rather your board chair have that conversation? And I think it just depends on a little bit where you are as a school, what your political chits are, and also who this guy is. Because certain personalities are going to deal with that better, right? And this is where I like Jack's point, like, I love having that early dialogue and how are we going to deal with disagreements, but also how are we going to talk through who's riding herd on situations like this, because I think it's going to depend a little bit on the personalities in the mix and what the topics are. A lot of times heads will call me and you've got factions of boards fighting. And to me, that's a Clash of the Titans situation. You just you almost have to get out of the way, and the board is going to have to work through some of that themselves. Jack, did you have something you want to add? Yeah, so I think siphoning it off, yes, in the back.
What happens if it's not resolved in a one-on-one conversation? Board chair talks to vice chair, not resolved.
Like, how do you remove this person, or ultimately, how do you manage
That's
this?
the question. So you take it to the full board and you.
Yeah, it sort of depends a bit on how much this person's going to push this. Legally, how much could you push it? So I want you to bear that in mind whenever you've got this situation coming up, because politically this can turn into a pretty hot topic. And over the last 3 years, I have only actually gotten calls like this from Southern schools. California has some special problems, the Northeast has some different issues, but actually board members who say, I actually have a right to see student records. And in like the state of Florida, they do, actually, and they can push for that. So managing this and making sure this person doesn't get too far afield, enforcing best practices is really important. Because Rutledge is exactly right, as the board, the fiduciary buck stops with you. And so it's important to understand that.
I guess one of my questions about this situation is what is the school's official policy about their financial aid process? And would it be more productive for that vice chair to be involved in revising or revisiting the policy?
Yes, I love it. Is everybody in here, most people in here, parents? This is like the deflection campaign we use with 3-year-olds, right? Like, look over there, sort of related, bright, shiny object. Yeah. How are we thinking about it? How are we looking at it? And particularly if your board has a huge push to endow financial aid, I mean, this is a huge priority. You want this donor to be participating, to still give to the school. If they've given this long, chances are pretty good you actually need their funding going forward. So what else are you doing to kind of keep that person on board? You probably still don't really want them as board chair next year. That might be more problematic. So what's happened with personal deductions in charitable giving? It's less powerful. So with tax reform, we doubled the standard deduction, and a lot of people figured out this past spring that they didn't actually need their itemizations because it was actually better for them to take the standard deduction. And then they lowered the mortgage interest deduction, some of these other pieces. A lot fewer people are itemizing now. And you'll see this. So we went from about 1/3 of people itemizing to 5 to 8% of people itemizing. And we were a big part of the lobby on this when I was at NEIS. It could be a reduction of $13 billion a year in charitable giving.
Is there any data out there on what has happened on the giving?
See, and aren't you so glad you came today? So this year so far, charitable giving has been slow in 2019 across the nonprofit sector. And these are some of the approaches that schools have been looking at, nonprofits have been looking at. That bundling piece is a big one. So for people who want to really leverage the tax incentives behind giving, schools are actually pretty well situated for this. So I could give to Charleston Day School in the spring and give to them in the fall, and then I'm basically bundling those charitable gifts for 2019. And then I won't give again until the spring of 21, and then do it in the fall of 21. I'm still hitting every academic year, but I'm skipping a tax year. So I'm bundling my charitable giving. If you can find a short way to explain that to anybody, let me know. We'll send it far and wide. But this is a real issue for schools, particularly if your school, some schools have a lot of big gifts, or a good number of big gifts, and a lot of schools have a lot of kind of small or mid-sized gifts. Those are the ones you've got to watch, because those people are going to be kind of on the edge of your itemization. You're looking at over $500,000 before you move away from that standard deduction. So you're talking getting into upper income levels. In terms of data, this is the estimated share of taxpayers taking itemized deductions. The blue line is pre-tax law change, and the orange line is after tax law change. So you'll see kind of in the upper levels, it doesn't change too much, but it's that kind of mid-tier that it really starts to become an issue. These are endowment values. I'm actually going to move along. All right, Amada, you want to talk about this data?
Yes, thank you, Debra. To your question about what is happening to annual giving, what we're finding is that we're seeing the lower participation of parents. These lines represent the year 2010, and the dark purple is 2019. And all of this is by different metro areas in SAIS schools. You have Atlanta, Charlotte, Greensboro, Memphis, etc. But we're seeing a little bit of lower participation rates among parents. What we're hearing on an anecdotal basis is that parents are saying, you are hitting constantly our pockets. And if we move along on the data, there is big changes also in total participation. Again, this is annual giving. 2010 are the lines in gray, and the purple the current numbers. Oh, this was a parent participation. This is in annual giving.
Yeah, so this is just parent participation, and I'll note 2010 is not too long after the financial crisis. That makes this especially exciting, right? And now this is 2019, and when we say 2019, so it's last school year.
Exactly.
And then this is total participation.
Exactly. So this includes also alumni, grandparents, etc. Is the whole group. But we see bigger changes here. For instance, in Charlotte, right? You see a big gap there. Nashville as well. And overall, for all SIS schools, we see that the total participation in annual giving has been going down. In terms of average gift, that's another area where we see also some changes, and it really depends on where you are located. Again, comparing, and this is comparing, by the way, after adjusting for inflation. So the numbers in 2010 versus 2019. You can see areas where that average gift has increased, like for instance in Greensboro, but in most of the areas we're seeing that is lower than before. Charlotte, Miami, and overall for all SIS schools we are kind of around the same. Debra, the next one. This is trustees' average gift. Again, we have some data for some of the areas among the SIS schools, and I'm comparing 2010 with 2019. Same thing, depending on where you are located, the changes might be different. But one of the things that we are hearing from schools is precisely what the description of that case study was. We're seeing that we're moving away from smaller donors or smaller gift to very high gift. No, and that poses a challenge for our schools because we might be dependent on, a big donor in our school and deciding on his or her personal agenda.